Well, it's good to see you, man. I thought if you want, we could kind of kick things off, do a little brief intros, kind of let you talk a little bit about your background and all of that. That'd be awesome for everybody.
Yeah, we've got some interesting stuff today.
Yeah.
So excited.
So my name is Jordan Schaefer. I work at Pulse. I've been at Pulse for 15 years. Been in the payments industry for 20 years. At Pulse, we do debit all day long, payment card, debit all day long. And I've been in our operations department that whole time. So that's things like servicing B2B customers, processors, FIs, merchants, things like that. Making sure that transaction processing is working, that settlement's working, that disputes are working okay. One of my current hats is fraud management as well, making sure that we're reducing fraud on our network and for our issuers and our banks.
Awesome. I'm
Yeah,
excited on this topic, man, and I know it's a bit of a nerdy topic, right? I know you probably like it as much as I do because it's an important one, and I think it's a big one right now with fraud, especially as it relates in sort of the emerging world of fintech, everything else, and all the mazes that we're seeing there. So
The elephant in the room.
yeah, man, if you don't mind, would you start just giving us from your perspective, because you see more of it than all the rest of us do? What are you seeing in the fraud world, and what do you think are the important parts, especially as it relates to debit?
yeah, I'd love to talk about fraud. I mean, it's a topic that everybody loves to talk about, and I think the more we talk about it as partners in the industry, the better off we are working together on this.
Yeah.
So I guess there's a couple trends, I guess, that I would say that we're seeing in fraud lately within the payment card space. The first one is the saturation of card not present transactions across the entire payments ecosystem. It's driven really by two factors. One factor is obviously the pandemic and the rise in e-commerce, card on file, in-app purchases, contactless payments. That has all transitioned into a card not present world. So at Pulse, as an example, before the pandemic, we were probably seeing single-digit card not present transactions, and now we're over a third of our network is card not present transactions.
It's huge.
Yeah, the second aspect is regulation. The Durbin Amendment, the Reg II clarification that went into effect on July 1 of this year. And what that has done for your viewers and listeners, the Durbin Amendment requires for all point of sale debit transactions that every merchant be presented with at least two unaffiliated networks to send those transactions to. And particularly in July 1, the clarification clarified that requirement applied to card not present transactions. Mm-hmm. And so for those two reasons, the pandemic and the regulation, we have really seen an uptick in card not present transactions. And along with transaction shifting, we've seen fraud shift as well. And so at Pulse, we've done a number of things to help make sure that that we're mitigating against card not present fraud.
Before we jump into the fraud piece, just on that particular topic of the change in Durbin on July 1, have you seen? I mean, what's the question I get from everybody is, what the hell difference does it make, right? Are people actually choosing secondary, or are they being presented a different interchange rate? What difference does it really make to the average Joe walking down the street? And I don't really know the answer to that. Tell them.
Yeah, to the average consumer, the average cardholder, there's not much of a difference. Okay. There's a big difference for the merchant community. I mean, they're presented options that they haven't had before. It's a big difference for me on the network side. I am now seeing transactions that I didn't see before. Things like token card on file is a big one. Those transactions are starting to route through the Pulse network. And my responsibility is to work with our business-to-business partners, our issuers, our community banks, to make sure that they understand that these are transactions that may have been coming from your front of card brand, but now might be coming from your unaffiliated network. And what can we do to partner together to make sure that you're prepared to see these transactions over both of your networks?
Perfect. Good answer. Okay, here's the cool part on the fraud thing for me is it seems like, there's we'll call them bad guys. As soon as we solve this problem, they come up with a new way, right?
And change is always like the biggest nightmare.
This is, I think, a really big thing for people to realize. It's not like there's a problem there that can't be solved. It's that you solve this one and there's another one. Is that a true statement?
Yeah, absolutely. It rears its head. in different ways. I mean, I guess I gave you a couple examples while we're talking here. I've in advance of this conversation, I went to ChatGPT and I asked it a question. I said, ChatGPT, if I was a fraudster trying to get into payment card fraud, what type of techniques could I use? And the response I got back from ChatGPT was, I would say examples like you have heard before, skimming, phishing, unauthorized payment card fraud. And then I tweaked my question to ChatGPT a little bit different. I said, ChatGPT, if I was a fraudster and I wanted to use you, ChatGPT, to conduct fraud, what would I do? And the answer was immediately scam. And we could talk about scam for an hour, I would say. But the rise of AI in our industry and the ability to quickly gather information from cardholders to imitate cardholders in voice and chat, I mean, it has really risen to a new level, the amount of scam fraud that we're seeing. When I say scam, I want to make sure I'm really clear what I'm talking about. And what we used to see is third-party unauthorized fraud, someone stealing your information and going and doing a purchase using your information. It wasn't me that did it. It wasn't me, the cardholder. With scam fraud, it's what I call first-person authorized fraud. The cardholder themselves is doing the purchase. And they have buyer's remorse afterwards. Like, oh gosh, I didn't mean to sign up for this recurring bill payment service. I thought, Elon Musk was going to send me Bitcoin if I did this, as an example. Or I went down to my local bank. I went to your ATM because I saw this TikTok video that showed me how I could go get free money from the ATM. These are these are things that are AI generated, that are new and innovative ways of fraudsters to take advantage of the system and try to conduct fraud.
It's super interesting to me because, I mean, I think every banker out there, every fintech or vendor out there, I mean, you see it in your own shop just via email, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, you probably get 3 or 5 a day, and you know that your other coworkers are getting the same, right? And I mean, I can tell you, just looking at it objectively, the sophistication has gone through the roof.
Oh yeah.
I mean, there's stuff where if I wasn't actively thinking about it and I was me 5 years ago, they probably would have had me, right? And I mean, we all do this for a living and we know better. And so if you think about our, bank consumers, woof, it's a much higher bar than it used to be, and it's a lot more sophisticated.
I'll tell you what, as a business owner, I mean, you get these things, and first thought is, I wonder what happens when somebody else on the staff gets this. And so far, I've got really smart people. They've been able to keep us out of trouble. But you're right, man. I mean, some good ones out there where I'm like,
well, and the parts and pieces, right? I mean, you think about it, it's got to be channel driven, right? So email, phone, think about text notifications, tokenized, right? Identity. I mean, there's a lot of different parts and pieces to prey on.
Yeah, and just to back up a second, folks, what everybody's talking about was the card not present. If I walk up to give blood and I'm like, here's my driver's license, here's my face, here's good. Yeah, Dave, that's you.
You give blood off them?
No, I'm just saying if I did. I don't have enough of it as it is. So anyway, if you can verify somebody, it's a whole lot easier to go, okay, this is not a fraud case. When you get to Amazon and you go to checkout, all right, you're not actually there. There's nobody that can look at your, ask you for your driver's license and verify anything. And so card not present, that's where we're all doing all kinds of stuff. Hell, everybody's got Amazon packages and ordering groceries now and all kinds of stuff. And if you're able to penetrate that wall and get inside of there, it's game on.
And Jordan, is there a big difference thinking about card on file, which is an interesting topic, right? And the shift from more traditional bill pay to card on file, thinking about subscriptions and things you talked about, versus more mobile payments, right? Tap to pay, things like that.
Wallet.
Do you see a big difference there, and are some of the trends driven off of that type of thing?
Yeah, I mean, different merchants use different authentication avenues to get transactions to us. Those are all different ways that on the merchant side, you can help authenticate a transaction to try to reduce fraud to the network. And then our issuers will, validate different data elements in our online message based on whether, things like a CVV2 was there and present in the transaction for a traditional e-com transaction, or if it's a card on file, that the initial purchase, the initial authorization request will have a lot of information in it to help us know that recurring payments might be coming. and that the issuer should then, approve those recurring payments based on the initial authorization and the fact that it's recurring and the card on file. So I would say there's configurations and data elements within the online message that helps the issuer understand what type of transaction it is, how it was authenticated, to try to reduce fraud. But I want to touch on something you guys talked about in the card not present space. Because you're not physically present, the fraudsters take advantage of that. In a typical card present environment, cardholder has cards in their hand. They have skimped cards in their hand. They're going one by one through these cards trying to withdraw money from an ATM. In a card not present environment, the fraudsters can rely on bots to just rapidly send transactions through the network in rapid succession to try to figure out which cards are active, which are not, which have balances on them, which ones don't. And then they'll take that information and they'll sell it in the dark web. And someone will go out and then use that information to try to do higher dollar transactions on those cards that were validated as being active. So something that Pulse has done, in advance of leading up to the July 1 Reg II mandate, we put in network-wide safety rules across our entire network to block against bin and bot attacks, as we call them. These card not present attacks that just come in rapid succession in a couple minutes. We're seeing thousands of transactions come from, let's say a merchant that didn't exist. This is the first transactions they've ever sent through our network, but they're slamming these transactions in, and we've built protections in place at the Pulse network to help block that type of activity, so that our issuers and our community banks don't see that type of activity.
Yeah, one of the old ways, and when people would be like, on this new account, new accounts were always like a scary area, and it's like after 100 or 90 days or 120 days, and it's like, how long does it take the smart people to go, let's do it on the 91st day or the 122nd day, right? Yeah. And so as you guys kind of get ahead of their game a little bit, it's like we can continue to accelerate the card not present world and make it safer at the same time. I mean, is that kind of where you guys are driving at?
And to double down on that, thinking about
outsmarting their own game.
Yeah, your moves and your categorizations, because we all know, I mean, I'd love you to talk a little bit about it, but when you're working with a community bank, regional bank, and you sit down and you outline what those parameters are, it's a give and take, right? And I mean, we've all seen this scenario play out where it's like, we twisted the dial a little too tight, and now call centers through the roof, customers are pissed, everything's getting rejected, right?
Approved, yeah.
Right, but we also know that looks like if you go the other way. And so I feel like, you have a really good perspective, and I think you guys are looked to a lot as that leadership to help community banks define what that line is. So what do you think on that topic?
Yeah, and we've segregated our product offerings based on those type of variables. So like I was just mentioning recently, our network-wide safety rules, those are implemented for all of our customers. You didn't have to opt into it. We're just helping protect you. And that's because these are transactions you might not have seen before from the Pulse network. We want to make sure that we're protecting you, that you get used to these transactions being sent from Pulse to you, and that they're secure. We also have a premium service that we call our Debit Protect Authorization Blocking Service, where it's what we were just talking about. We work one-on-one with the fraud contacts at those community banks, at those regional banks, and we help develop custom rules very specific to your own card base, right? And we work daily with our Debit Protect Authorization blocking customers to tweak rules based on different fraud events that you're seeing that are unique to your cardholder base.
I've always thought about that as something that's really interesting, that I mean, you end up with a really sophisticated set of rules-based logic over time that gets cumulatively more effective.
You got to think like a G, though, man.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to get ahead of these guys, and that's really where I would find that like crazy interesting.
I know you would.
If somebody would sit me in a room and say, "Okay, think like a gangster," and think like
well,
a
and with
guy.
the data to go with it, right, and trying to determine use cases and what's going on, that's a fun game, man. I really think that's cool.
Yeah, I mean, we fight bots with bots. So the fraudsters have their bots. We have our own bots. I'll give you an example. We have a fraud score that we insert into every transaction that runs through our switch. We make this fraud score available to our issuer processors, so they can ingest it within their own fraud system. So there's a layered approach to how we fight fraud. But this fraud score uses some sophisticated information. I won't give you the whole recipe for this, but I'll give you guys a little bit, right? I'll give you guys a little bit. So we use a neural network fraud score that is given to us by our vendor FICO, and FICO has a consortium model, a consortium debit model, where there's 9,000 financial institutions that participate in this model, and we all submit fraud data to FICO, and FICO develops their fraud score based on information from all these different issuers that are seeing fraud in all these unique places. We develop cardholder profiles for every PAN, every card in our network has a cardholder profile associated with it, where we track the type of typical activity that cardholder does. We have something we call B lists, or behavior sorted lists, that helps profile the type of activity a cardholder normally does. And when they do transactions that are outside of those B lists, or those normal merchants that they go to, those normal type of transactions that they go to, a transaction is 42 times more likely to be fraudulent. And so all of this information gets incorporated into one 3-digit fraud score. From 1 to 999 is our fraud score. Obviously, the higher the number, the more likely it is to be fraud. And we've developed fraud rules based on the fraud score that we get in the online message, and many other variables. But this is all happening in real time. Within milliseconds, we're assigning a fraud score to every transaction. We're making that fraud score available to our processors, our community and regional banks, so that they can use that within their own fraud systems too. Part of Pulse's motto is to be the best partner that we can be, because when our banks and credit unions and regional banks are successful, we're successful, you're our customers. We want to make you happy. So this is an area we like to share information. So I'm glad I could come on here and be with you guys and spread some of the love, because we're all working together to help on this.
Hell, I didn't know anything about any of that.
I know. I'm just sitting here with the wheels turning. It's really cool. I've only seen a lot of this from the other side, right? Going in, working with a banker and working with you guys, and you get a really cool insight into what we're doing and why. But the how has always been a mystery. So
yeah, I mean,
it's really cool.
Working up, behavioral characteristics. I mean, that's obviously something not brand new, but being able to do it at the PAN ID level for every single person in the network is like, okay, that's getting a little cooler.
So I have a bigger theme question on this topic.
I've got, like in business, we've got cards that we just do recurring things for, as opposed to off purchases, right? And so that really, sorry, wheels are rolling, man. That was good stuff.
No, yeah. Yeah, so we would create B lists for those cards and say, okay, this cardholder only does those recurring purchases. If they were to do a non-recurring purchase, that would be a flag.
So just kind of coming up to 100,000 feet. I mean, you've played in this for a long time. Seriously know this a lot better than the rest of us. But everything that we're all hearing, I mean, pick your favorite magazine or comic book, right? And it's fraud, and the fraudsters are going to take over the world. So what do you feel about the macro trend, man? I mean, is everything going to get worse as technology continues to advance and AI? I mean, obviously the threats are getting more sophisticated, but I damn sure know that you guys are getting a lot more sophisticated too. Do we ultimately win?
Are you asking who's going to win the damn war?
I mean, you've probably watched this for, like you said, for 20 years kind of going on. And is there a tipping point, or I know it's a crazy question, but I'd love to get your thoughts.
Yeah, I have seen fraud act like a hydra. You take one head out, it pops another head out somewhere else. I think we'll continue to cut off some heads of the hydra, and we'll see it pop out. The places I'm worried about it popping up is in AI. The more that fraudsters can convince, I'd say, call centers, dispute agents, that they are the cardholder themselves, the more risky it is for fraud losses. I'll give you one example of a type of fraud that we've seen recently and has grown another head, if you will, in the hydra. And this is merchandise return fraud, where the initial transaction is a credit to the cardholder that they then will pull out of the terminal before the transaction completes, force a reversal to come to that card. And if the core system isn't processing the reversal in real time, or if they're making that initial credit return available immediately, there's concern that cardholder could then go and withdraw the funds from that initial credit return before the reversal hits. Or what they'll do, and I've seen AI used to do this, the fraudster will pretend that they're the cardholder. they'll call into the call center and try to dispute the transaction. Say, I did this return. I got rid of the merchandise. I never got my credit. And then the dispute agent will go into it and they'll say, okay, well, yep, there it is. I see the credit return. I see the reversal. You're telling me that reversal didn't happen. What they'll tend to do is give a provisional credit to that cardholder while they're going and working the dispute. You got to be careful not to do that in certain scenarios, not to give that provisional credit, because once they get that provisional credit, the fraudster's off and emptying that account.
Yeah, this is.
But
good.
that's.
I've heard similar stories where people are actually, popping up as a refund due or whatever, and there was never an actual transaction that was made. So some really tricky shit that goes on there, and some of these things that you're talking about, this is not my dog Crockett. I mean, these are very sophisticated players, and let's say well-funded badasses.
Yeah.
And then they come up against you. So,
yeah.
So real quick on that theme, I mean, if I'm a community banker and I've had this conversation with plenty, it's kind of you end up with liability in dollars, right? I mean, ultimately that's where all this ends. Yeah, we all end up with money and liability. And where does it fall, right? And so, I mean, hey, let's say I'm I'll just be me, right? And somebody asked me for some information. I made a boo-boo, they get my info, I'm scammed out, cool. But it really was, rather than someone else's fault or something was hacked and it wasn't because of me, this was I gave it out, right? We ultimately end up in the same thing as the consumer get their money back. And where are those lines and have they been moving?
That is such a profound question. I've been to conferences in the last year where that is the number one question. Who is liable for scam fraud? And the way that we look at liability at the payments network is who are the participants in the transaction? Is it the merchant? Is it the issuer? Is the issuer going to pass it to the cardholder? Or is there regulation in the works to make sure the issuer can't pass it to the cardholder? Is it the social media platforms that influence that individual to give up and be scammed? That's a scenario that we're seeing as well play out as a possibility, even though they're not part of the actual transaction life cycle. Is there some liability there? These are questions that are out there in the industry. There's no real answers yet, but you can think, where could this land in today's world in a payment card transaction? If a cardholder gets scammed, they are liable. That's the way it is today. If first person authorized fraud, you perform that transaction, the merchant's going to be able to provide all the compelling evidence you want to show that the cardholder authorized this. I have the IP of their phone, the geolocation was at their house when they did it. Like, sorry, this is you. Cardholder, you're liable. But what I will find interesting is how the conversations and regulations turn out with social media platforms that may have allowed that individual to be influenced.
Now we're talking, especially when you talk about the elderly. And I remember my grandmother, man, it was end of days constantly. And, giving her last $20 to Jimmy Swaggart or whatever. And, I'm not trying to pick on that so much as being targeted with things that, that give a reaction to trigger people to do things that they maybe normally wouldn't.
When data and AI allows fraudsters to profile what those emotions are in people.
Right. No laws were broken, but people were allowed to do things on TV that, if we're talking about protecting consumers, there isn't a way you can have this conversation where you don't have to say, you have to, protect people from themselves sometimes. And allowing, the used car sales guy approach to whatever it is, whether that be they're selling religion or life after death or medical devices or all kinds of things that are
anything that's emotional.
There's just lots of things the elderly get zapped over that they're doing it for the best of intentions and best of reasons, and we're not really addressing that side as aggressively.
What's really interesting, think like a banker, right? On one hand, everybody is screaming at me, personalization, data, personalization, right? And personalized messaging to get customers. The same is true on the fraud side, right? And so it's a very weird thing. And I think we all need to stand back and objectively look at that a little bit different.
Well, and to the point I was trying to get with this crazy talk is that there's so much you guys can do, which is absolutely amazing. What you're able to do on the, let's call it true fraud side, as opposed to a scam, you know, and somebody, you know, talking me out of my wallet, that's me. But at the same time, I need to be protected from that. That's not your job. That's more of a societal issue or regulatory issue. But being able to say, okay, we can catch fraud and just fight, you know.
Well, Jordan probably didn't want to say this, but
badass.
A little bit of a badge of honor that doing such a good against the traditional fraud side that it's forcing the bad guys to the scam side. I mean, that you should, you know, that's good,
really,
right?
If you break this down, you've got your side of the equation, which sounds like you guys are just kicking some butt over there, and they're having to take you on at a different level every time that they want to fight because you're fighting back. And then we've got the scam side, or let's even go further and call it, you know, FinTech scam side, where you never get to actually meet the customer, and they're lured into taking whatever action they were allowed to lure into. That is a whole different critter. Yeah. And honestly, when we break down, you know, let's talk about who's liable and how the money flows, right? You've got an element, like you said, of the scam side. That's a big piece, and that's a big piece that's not your fault. That's my fault, right? And there's a hell of a lot you can do when I'm a dumbass, and like me. But likewise, there are things that other people can do to handle that side. Now, let's say you're a criminal. See, I was a dumbass and he's a criminal, so this is working out pretty good. So
I'll take it.
Yeah, man. And you're over here trying to, you know, show a transaction that didn't happen and get a credit refund on this thing and then turn that to cash and give it over to the mafia or whatever it is that these guys do. And then he's catching your ass in a big way. All right. That, I believe, is what, if you want to have words like responsibility, you're fighting where you should be fighting, you know. And this other fight over here on my side, that's not your fight, I don't think. Now, maybe I'm wrong on that, but I think that's a fight that needs to be held more at the congressional level. What do you think?
So obviously our mission is to help our participants, help our issuers, help our regional banks, help our community banks. And so we have thought about this as a company, and we've developed a product, obviously, to help with this, and on behalf of product that we offer. But it's just an example of what a bank could do, and it double clicks on the concept of hyper personalization, right? Who is best to know that cardholder? This is an area where a community bank would have a great advantage over, you know, a multi-billion-dollar bank. You guys know who your cardholders are, you know. And so the product that we offer is customer communication services. If there is a transaction that is suspicious, we can send an SMS text to the cardholder, we could do phone call or email, and we can prompt for messages like, hey, we suspect that this was a scam. Are you sure you want to do this transaction? And that will get that cardholder thinking, okay, maybe this was a scam. Maybe I do want to double check to make sure that that I'm not getting scammed off here.
You're gonna
That's
laugh.
a type of hyper personalization that I think is really important.
Literally 1 minute before we got on this call, he got a call from our community bank, right, about a transaction. And he's like, okay, cool, approved, right? Exactly what you're saying. But, and I mean, we obviously know them well and do a lot of business with them. And it's exactly what you're saying, right? Very cool.
Yeah. It's an area that a community bank could really thrive, because you guys know your customers better than anyone else.
That's awesome.
I can't believe that. I wasn't even thinking about that until you said it. They literally called me and wanted to
outlined it perfect.
And I was like, yep, that's the guy. I know the guy well. All good.
Yeah, that's really cool. Look, this has been an awesome conversation. I loved every bit of this. I learned a bunch too. But I want to give you a couple of minutes for just final thoughts, man. Anything else that's on your mind? I know we've covered a lot, and anything you want to say, man.
What's the stuff we should have talked about?
Yeah, there you go.
Didn't ask you.
Yeah, I mean, I love talking about this. I could talk all day long about fraud. I just the importance of understanding your customers. You know, from our standpoint, understanding our processors, understanding our merchants, understanding our community banks and our regional banks, having great partnerships with those individuals. I mean, we have on my side, I manage a relationship management team as well, and so we have account executives that are assigned to all these different accounts that we have. We talk to our customers daily. It's the same opportunity that a community bank has, that a regional bank has, to talk to those customers daily to make sure they understand and create their own profiles for those card holders. It's really about communicating, working together as an industry to help solve fraud. What I like to say is, I'm a network. I can put in fraud safety rules that are pretty high level, non-specific to your exact fraud situation that you're dealing with. There's a lot of value in that. There's also value in, like, an issuer processor having fraud services in place, for a core processor having fraud services in place. We need to work together as an industry to help solve this. And forums like this, like you guys' podcast, is a great way we can reach out and have conversations like this. We just need to keep doing that in all different ways, work together to help cut off these different heads of the Hydra that pop up.
I love it.
I really do. I
Yeah.
mean, the idea that you could get the conversation going across industry pieces and parts.
It's
like,
great.
Like
Really
coercion
great.
payments and
Yeah.
things like that, where people start working together. There's a lot of folks out there that have different levels of depth,
You bet.
at that, depending on which core you're talking about and whatnot. But having this open communication and hearing back from your customers, man.
Yeah, everybody working together is great.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I had a ball. This was really cool, man.
Me too.
And look forward to talking with you again and seeing you soon.
All right, I appreciate the opportunity.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
See you next time.